Good afternoon. This is the second day I'm continuing to speak on and about the pedagogy of conscience. And I have found this to be a very crucial time, a very important time um, over these past 10 years, as I have started after a long 40 odd years in business. And before that, 1974, when I have created the counseling system called 3C, involving the communication dynamics, communication analytica, and then in between the entire educational sphere, the cultural sphere, linking those two other um, techniques, basically, in the counseling field. Totally um, maturing from the Freudian psychology until I have embraced the graphic driven transactional analysis by Eric Burns, where I have used applied. And in that development of the three C's, part of the content of the analytica, of the dialogues of exchanges, or by the narration prescription by my students and people that I did counseling with, were part of the develop the three dynamic spheres. Well, I shouldn't call it all spheres. It's the shapes using the round, the square, and then the triangle. The triangle is a turn of the square. Subsequently, the entire um, clarification in the analysis of the person with their dialogue, their engagement, either using any kind of a projective format like Gestalt. I managed to using the three shapes of the square, the round, and the triangle without me knowing that extensively in 74, 75, 76, and then 45 years later when I come back, we embraced the the um, the use of the three C's, where I think it can become a language of communications and to be used in all cultures. I myself is a cross-cultural product, born in China, raised in Hong Kong, Macau, with the Chinese dialectics uses, and then eventually from the Macau to Brazil. Again, I will repeat, my education was very much engaged with the Italian Order of the Salesians, or School of Don Bosco, in both Macau and then in Brazil eventually. This transitioning from Asia into the Americas, and from Brazil eventually, I came to college, university here in Wisconsin, and all this experience of cultures, all this experience with the languages had given me the idea, as I have always questioned, when can we have a language of counseling and in psychology, not limited to English only, even by my own definition and thinking, the language of Sigmund Freud in psychoanalysis, coming from the Germanic language and from German into the US in English. And eventually I'm putting also in my experience in Brazil and the language into Portuguese, and from the Portuguese. But what is that language can do or had done? Where can I create a language about communications, working with the indigenous people and the native Brazilians? That part of my 45 years when I jumped ship from education into private business, I have never let go of that focus. My curiosity with the indigenous culture of Brazil continue with my business, gem trade and mineral trade, where it had taken me to the various regions of Brazil. My early interest with the Chavantes, with the missions of Salesians in the state of Mato Grosso, continue on to the eventual visit with the native tribes of the Sintas Largas in the area of Rondônia, northwest of Brazil, in the region, what is called the Roosevelt Reserve. It's the reservation founded by the expedition of the American President Teddy Roosevelt and his guy or his companion, directing his time in that region of Brazil, in the Amazons, with Colonel Rondon, Rondon, and so the province Rondônia, the new state from the old territory, becomes the region where these natives were located. And plus the part in 2008 when I gone up to Rio Negro in the upper Amazon near the Venezuelan-Colombian border, where the parish named San Gabriel Cachoeira, where I have met up with one of my another Chinese, ethnic Chinese. Now today he is a bishop. He was known to the Bispo dos Índios. He was the bishop of Indians, natives. And then I have taken my retreat, 2008, a 6-week retreat, meeting with the wonderful group of clergy, including the 2 other retired bishops, Bispo Acevedo, and amongst them, the language spoken, shared, and the languages and their engagement with the 30-plus ethnic natives in the region of the San Gabriel de Cachoeira. And my curiosity was a common language that was developed or evolved called Ningatu. And with all this continuous curiosity about people, about culture, how they live, how they interact, what were their form, their lifestyle, from native villages to the urban area, I have discovered that pretty much the same. They have the same level of stress, anxiety, issues with economics, family, argument, dispute. So in that particular week, 6 weeks, particular 6 week that I have tested with my developed 3C communication program, as I have found out, pretty much in what I have developed will be able to reach all nationalities without the necessary language of the region. A part of that is because also during my time in the development of the 3C's communication system, I have always been thinking after whatever happened to the missions of the Salesians. They were very much dedicated to the post-war era in Asia, be that in Hong Kong, Macau, Philippines, Bangkok, Indonesia, Malaysia, and also John Bosco had created his schools for the orphans after the First World War in Turin, in Italy. And by the same token, even without much of an economic perception then, with the increase of the migrants coming down from the northeast of Brazil, Nordeste, into the city urban area and creating their living quarters, by and large, the most visual, the most prominent, and the most noticeable of these few communities up in the hills, in the valleys above the city of Rio de Janeiro. And so those questions were raised, questioning about the school I have gone to and the religious order and their missions to help the poor around the world. And yet we seem to be overlooked the Brazilian domestic side of the problem. And so the reason I want to put this background to hear what we have today is because the much improvement, or better yet, what the psychology of round and square that I have developed, using basically this round shape and a square shape, and the twist the sideways of the square become the triangle, which is more like an attacking language, adopting from the transactional analysis of Eric Burns. And now it had moved me forward, because why this manifestation of a development of a communication format skill and with the psychology round and square, it also comes in for the long-term influence in my thinking about the Brazilian psychologist, thinker, teacher, Paulo Freire, and his idea about conscientization. When I translate the word conscience from Portuguese to English and to Chinese, what stands out to me, the translation was basically two words: Liang Xin, or the kind heart, Leung Sam in Cantonese. You can say kindness and heart, and you can put it in different format, a heart with human kindness. And so, but by the way Paulo Freire put it into a conscientization, we can go back to use the verb to conscientize. Upon this thinking, analysis, and reflection, I have discovered in 1500, the Chinese thinker, philosopher, educated by the name of Wang Yangming, had made the same advocacy by putting his teaching called Xin Shi. Shi is learning, Xin is heart. In the translation of Chinese into psychology into Chinese called Xin Li Shi, the heart, the learning in between is to administer. But the same word of administering, Li, Xin Li Shi, can put in also as a part of the word meaning reason. So can that be translated to the reasoning skill through our human hearts and the language, which is still in process, in development. And I'm definitely, if I have this psycholinguistic observation of languages and of the uses of the words, and also the phraseology of the forming, the cluster of the words, conscience, the conscientization from the Wang Yangming's, to advocate, to promote, to teach, to foster the language of the heart. And it just dawned on me, conscience is not of any methodology. Conscience is very much a part in us innately. You can call it morality, you can call it our personal sorting out values in a constancy. Today you can call nanoseconds in AI terms. You can talk about 24/7 and 365 a day. All of a sudden it dawned on me that the language of Conscience or Conscientization by Paulo Freire had allowed me to format Wang Yangming's To Conscientize Xingshi into consciencology. So, in part, it is the study of conscience. Only a few days ago, by researching the, the better definition about the pedagogy, namely, again, come from the book written by Paulo Freire, the pedagogy of the oppressed. In all this use and interplay with the words, and by knowing that conscience cannot be taught, but conscience is directly linking to the collective way how we think, and in thinking there's reflection about our past rights or wrongs, good stories, and reflection, also personal thinking about introspection, is self-study about, okay, I make an accusation, let's pick a politician of any name, and why? Was I fair? Also, as a 35 plus years as a member of the Rotary Club, I have always amazed and interested in the advocacy, in the basic, the four-way test. Is it the truth? Is it good for all concerned? I don't need the other two. So conscience has always a very much of a presence from the time of the Greek era, almost the same time, the 500 BC, of the three Chinese major philosophy thinkers were developed, to as common as today, that I use. One of my earliest awareness, the word conscience, come from Jimmy the Cricket, from the Walt Disney's film, Pinocchio, and one of the major character, and Jimmy the Cricket becomes the ambassador of conscience by asking, making the statement, let your conscience be the guide. Well, with this process of thinking, analysis, not so much about deduction or elimination in the words of conscientization, consciencology, and now the pedagogy of conscience. I think this is very crucial. I come to a crust, a point is about education. We learn, we study, so we can develop an understanding of the issues that we are dealing with, be that of any discipline. The whole purpose of education is to learn, and educator is to foster learning. In the case of Paulo Freire, very much committed. The only way to alleviation of the poverty then in Brazil in his time is by way of education. And he also highlighted education to be stuffed like drawers, not just all by memorization. Education had to be dynamic. Communication has to be dynamic. And now I'm opening one more day on the subject matter of the pedagogy of conscience. Why? Because we're all facing today one of the greatest world conflicts is between the United States and China. I'm highlighting this because probably it is one of the most practical approach for us to grasp what is conscience, why the pedagogy, why the technique, know-how get to be refined about conscience. And where I have noticed where in the world history that we had created such an absence, misunderstanding between the East and the West. By this analysis, it taken me to another analysis. Now is becoming a book And believe it or not, this book, I want to put the 100% usage with the AI system, namely or mainly is the Chat GPT. Because in my analysis about why, how come, what had happened, the West using the American situation today have such misunderstanding, a huge, a huge gap of more so when China is rising in many fronts, economically, technologically, and also China is going through another phase of the Renaissance. In knowing the language, be that in Spanish and Portuguese, Italian, French, grouping, I have grouped that into a linguistic group called Romantina, Roman Latina. And if I say the word renascencia in Portuguese, re is repeat, R-E, nasce, like the nascent moon or crescent moon, is the birth, the rebirth of an era, just like the Italian Renaissance, and how much by the Italian collective reflection and the study of the past and the linkage between the Roman culture and the early on the Greek culture. And how much have this Renaissance affair have benefited the Italians from covering the church in Florence, Santa Maria de Fioris of the flowers, in the using for my former business, jewelry, gemstones, and jewelers, by a jeweler from Florence, with the layers in between the brick layers is emulating the herringbones of the jewelry, had allowed the dome to be finished. So Renaissance also had given one of the best known novel for the Italian writer Dante Alighieri and his book Divine Comedy. The language of the Latin dominated Iberia, which is Portuguese and Spanish, and in France, had also given the much of the developments benefiting from the Roman language once, but improved upon it after they delinked from the Roman Latin, but never really delinked, or the conjugation or the study of Latin. And I also commenting the command of my learning of the three languages, plus just in the Romance field. I can read French, but added, now the elements of total surprise. And I put this so the Chinese scholars can have more reflection. What we have lost in one of the 4 books and 5 scriptures, 四序五经 from Confucius. Actually, there was a 6th book, not just the 5 books, 5 scriptures. It's music. Confucius used to be known as he was almost a meter, almost 2 meters tall, 6 feet and more. He sings and dancing with his weapon. In that particular time, they were very much of a double, have the exposure to martial arts, as well as in the studying that he had so well shaped and progressed with his discipline and thinking. But what is interesting in my improvement of my Latin and Romance languages is when I started serving Mass in Macau. Other than one-on-one, me and the priest going to many of these churches away from the school, many of the cloister monasteries for the nuns, when you're one-on-one with a priest, every word of the Latin Mass has to be clear because it's between myself and the priest, because the rest of the church is silent. And also in this time and period, in the schooling and learning of the Latin, we also have learned singing in Greek. And singing in Greek, very simple, I can show you the song of Kyrie. Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison. All this singing of the Greeks, and I have noticed very much in particular of the singing, the vibrancy, the tonality between an Italian priest, Father Peroni, and his baritone, versus, I call it, sung by a older Chinese priest, still remember well, Father Song. The way he sang the Kyries, for altar boys like we are, our knees, kneeling on many of the hard stone floors, that mass is longer, more painful. When we have a high mass with 6 to 8 boys holding lanterns, and then the other 2 of the principal service by the priest. So sound and music make the entire church moving faster, with a beautiful song is that Dominus vobiscum et cum spiritu tuo. But when you add to the Chinese, when Father's song singing his Kyrie is, I can just imagine even today, is when a rooster is being cut to the throat. The Italian priest and the Chinese priest, and I'm being unfair, but it shows that when you were young, you still have your sense of aesthetics, of sound, of music, and how Greek Gregorian chants were sung. And Father, when he sings Kyrie, sounds like a butcher shop. That's the way how he sings. Kyrie eleison. Wow. Thank God those are shorter versions. But when Peroni sings, Kyrie eleison. And also in the Gregorian chant, had allowed many of the continuation of the either the song or the prayer. And I can even I put this in the highlight so the Chinese can figure out how much that part of the song, the music that carried the Latins from the area of Jerusalem, Judea. I wasn't sure if the language was spoken at that time was Aramaic, but by the time he got to Tarsus by the Apostle Paul or by his Jewish name Saul, the Greco-Roman language emerged into an arena. And how can that Judaic or Aramaic language, an Asian language, progressed, gone on to the Greek area, and then went into Rome? And let me see if I can catch the tone. Because in this one tone, you can sing it in almost any language. In the beginning of the century, I am now using English. Podemos falar em português, espanhol e italiano. And we continue to talk like this and sing like this in the Gregorian chant. As you can see, you can pluck in every word in any language. In the Gregorian chant have extended the life and the living, making the Latin organic. And in singing the Gregorian chant with the Latin have made all speakers, orators, well, in many instances, followers, mass service youngsters to follow the same language. 如果你哋係廣東人，你識聽我唱乜嘢？再加上我講嘅廣東話。I just using that to plug in the Cantonese language. The Gregorian chant, partially for me, is another discovery in my psycholinguistic observation that cultures can perpetuate, or the song of the songs had allowed the words to be used first, how to pronounce it, not necessarily in the same intonation when you speak in language. But there's another step that many of us can sing the American songs, American popular songs in my time in the 60s. We talk about singing Peter, Paul, and Mary. We talk about all the popular songs of the Christian songs. Michael rowed the boat, and so on and so forth. Music will carry in your use of the words without feeling awkward and not use the right intonation. And so a part of this particular discovery that what I'm doing is to share with my audience here, because I do expect the pedagogy of the conscience will be able to expand to every single university, college, if this idea, the psycholinguistic, become part of the development of the pedagogy of the conscience. You will be wonderful is some discovery, not in the outer space, but in our own domain on earth. I'm going back to highlight the current disruption, contrast, the demonization between the US and the Chinese. Because in this discovery, sounds, music, musicality, the language, expression, the four Romance language used to call vulgar Latin, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian. I have yet talked about Galicia, the Gallego, the language in the northwest of Spain, and then in Sardinia, including the language called Romania, for Romania. They all have a great deal of influence of the Romance language. But what is in particular that I am highlighting, here comes another series of thinking, reflection, introspection. 1492, the year the Spanish Inquisition started by the Catholic kings, and the same year, Columbus' voyage, and mostly were financed by the ethnic Jewry for those who had mildly or not never adopted to the Christian faith, for those who are falsely adopted to the Christian faith, to be called conversos. In this particular year of the voyage of the Columbus, directly, indirectly, has started the global outreach by conquest, by much of the bloodshed, by the killing, mass murdering, by illness or by weapon into the Americas. Also, this is the same year, 1492, make that as a marker. The Western culture has started to conquering almost the world. First, the lingua franca, or the Portuguese and Spanish, from the Iberian Peninsula, followed by the ocean power and by the steam power developed by the English from the Industrial Revolution. And the English ocean conquering had allowed them landed into India 1600s. And in 1800s, with Opium War marking the year of 1840, the English literally managed to have conquered two of the wealthier, the largest country on this planet. There's no way at this moment, even with the big data, with the big cloud, and the support with the AI, but it's worth to study. How much have the English amassed the wealth of both India and China? And for the largest part is China. You can calculate by visuals, including the university, such like Harvard, Yale, Brown, and the East Coast of the United States. Many of these schools were funded by opium. For a while, the China trade, where the Americans extracting their wealth from China by way of opium, were shamed. They wouldn't hide behind the term China trade, including families like such as Astor, Forbes, Roosevelt, Delano, of Franklin Delano Roosevelt family, and many, many more. So the mass amount of silver they have taken out of China and other taken out of India, it basically given the longest term of wealth accumulation for the entire Anglo-American world. I have no qualm by adding from the banking to economic side, also the super beneficiaries of the two family linked to opium, the family of the Rothschild banks and the family of the Sassoon, whose plantation in then Bangladesh, India, and the opium not having a shorter route to China, but also better quality than the Turkish opium importing mainly by the American opium traders. But the most important factor that I want to put here to all of us is that the entire West, even up to now, by the American not become the major beneficiary who has started the globalization of the world, inviting Chinese into the WTO, in thinking that globalization is part of the Americanization of the globe. And in the past two industrial revolutions post-English, where the American Industrial Revolution, I put that just in vaguely, is the use of petroleum, is the robber baron era, then the railroad, electricity, the rest of the American invention creation had created the wealth in North America. And so, in this continuation of territorial expansion, of the extracting natural resources from other continents, including slavery. We can talk about slavery in Africa was part of the intertribal hatred or intertribal hostility. And we can talk about the participation of the Muslims or the Portuguese from Brazil and the Jewish ethnic groups. Trade. Many people were trading. But in all this development, and in a nutshell, what had even caused the westward navigation looking for the land of India by the Spanish, by the Portuguese, namely, is because the Ottoman Empire had taken over, ended, the long Silk Road from China to Europe. For 2,000 years, it was a totally uninterrupted trade between China, the Middle East, and into places like Italy. The cost of silk is weighted in gold. And so eventually, the other commodity is tea. What I'm trying to highlight, with all due respect, the people here in the audience can call me that I am being China centric. I'm trying as hard as I can. They say overseas Chinese. I left Asia, China, 1962 at age 14. I had somewhat blocked, or not deliberately. I had not reignited my study observation of the situation globally only by this bits and pieces, segments of my remembrance or memories, and that will coming on eventually to address within the framework of the development of the pedagogy of conscience. And I will borrow those terminologies from the Jewish diaspora, and also opium can be called the opium wars, can be recalled the Holocaust, opium Holocaust, the amount of devastation, the amount of migrant Chinese perishing, killed, murdered, either in the Canadian Railroad, American Railroad, and the Chinese almost replacing after the slavery with Chinese sent forward as indentured slaves to islands, outer islands of Peru, just to collect guano or the bird feces and the death in that area. I also mentioned yesterday other spots, other bits and pieces of Chinese in Suriname and the Chinese in Cuba, including ethnic Chinese heroes for the Cuban Revolution. So, in what I'm going to say one more time about the American latest round of globalization, when they finding out such globalization cannot be done, it's not Americans are not the only ones who are benefiting from this globalization, or the ulterior motives was to be Americanizing the globe. And I want to point out, even by the time of Obama, TTP has started to try to put the blockade, the Trans-Pacific trade, only to be centralized in the use of the American system as American allies and with dollar to help benefiting, again, the United States. If Obama dared to think back, the TTP format is no different how they colonized a few years back. Yes, the Brits were prohibiting the entire 13 colonies to fit any inter-provincial trade. And when the colonies starting to smuggle out their products from Boston, from Pennsylvania, and to trade directly in the Caribbeans with sugar, with other commodities, that is where and when create a stir. And then what had led to the Boston Tea Party and whatnot. I am coming in speaking in bits and pieces. And then what is most amazing in this book, I have just started to write 4 days ago, is the Pedagogy of Conscience. In this particular book, in every one of my extended paragraphs, and yet composing as a question posting into ChatGPT. I have other options. I would like to use Claude because they have the input with pictures, images. But what I have done in 150 pages, but this is in font 14, using another script. But what I'm trying to say, today you can ask a question. The question I'm asking to articulate the past, such as the year 1840, the Opium War, you will get an answer by the collective intelligence we have today. You will give you peripheral events. They have never rejected. Your question got to be better focused. Your question is too extensive. They answered point by point. As in, from the question about the American involvement in the China trade and the opium, the number of schools, the number of companies, the number of participants in the East Coast in America, what the ChatGPT today is a superior intelligence where you and I have to admit they are covering the grounds in multiples. When we talk about history, we talk about one-sided. We talk about our dimension. I can speak all day about the pain and suffering of the Chinese. You will have nothing to do with the other engagement, the economic development, and the advancement of the economic advancement for the British. And subsequently, when I'm relating, even jump from topic to topic, we sound fragmented. What I want to share here in the way I see conscience can bring along a future, it's a long letter, consciological civilization that can be enduring, more enduring because our participation. But I want to remind one more time, the biggest mistake from the collective West, the biggest margin of error is because of your monotheist religion. Even the educators, for those whom I most admire, baptized by the Jesuits, baptized by one of the Jesuits who has one of the deepest grasp of the Chinese philosophy, psychology, and history, is Matteo Ricci. And I was baptized in Macau by the Matteo Ricci mission. And Matteo Ricci has many centers around the world, including one of the most prominent center located in Beijing. And Matteo Ricci is one of the few religious person wanting to be able to find an interface between the Chinese orderly Confucian order to interface with the evangelical value of the Vatican. Matteo Ricci almost got rescinded from China back to Italy by the accusation by the other two orders, the Franciscan and the Dominican, accusing Ricci is not doing enough evangelization. So in the procurement, by highlighting what the Western systems of value thinking, because your four religious groups, your four groups of religious orders, starting with the Judaism, I'm highlighting ISM, to the Roman Catholicism, a split from the Old Testament to the New, and then you have another split with the Protestants, or we can call it Protestantism. And also the last, Islamism. The ISM in this categorical projective values about the Chinese, maybe even the other Indian values. You have put the teaching of Confucius, the teaching of Lao Tzu, natural ecological sets of value, and Buddha, his compassionate ideas thinking had brought him from India. What is amazing in what I have discovered, and most obviously, I think all the people in the future involving in this passage of the pedagogy of conscience can challenge, can dispute, can argue, can disagree, but more will be better is because the entire West have taken all the Chinese value system directing on and about human conscience, and none of them are religion. You may have perceived the many temples, incense everywhere. The temples, or even the ancestral halls, mostly is in the sense of a gratitude, expressing for the benefits. When Chinese go into a temple to offer incense, the commoners may have a very simple purpose. Give the blessing to my son who is traveling to the city, to the capital, to take on examinations. Blast him with his safety, the trip, and the success of his work. And every incense they offer, sometime later, they have to return to thank the events. So, in a nutshell, I am walking through this passage past to grasp, to understand the Chinese, as I have discovered, all of the directives of the focus of the Chinese disciplines mainly is focused on the human conscience. I just hope I will continue this conversation and continue these directives. And as always, teachers are catalysts. I look at the what I have learned from the one word. I basically almost call it the one word Zen. Yes, I do have much. I have been grateful also to the early Zens without the scripture like in the Buddhistic values. And I thank Paulo Freire as the major catalyst that make me think. And conscience can only be promoted, advocated by our thinking. And talk about this one word of thinking, what had the input to make me link closer conscience and thinking is basically you can Google Socrates' quote on thinking, where he said, I cannot teach people anything. All I can do is teach them how to think. And for me, that's one of the most profound, unwritten words about human conscience. And yet, by action, just like Wang Yangming, by action, just like Paulo Freire, to advocate, to promote, to teach human kindness in the use of the language of the heart. Because being kind always having a double benefit. Because when you're kind, you're also being good. And I hope in this, my personal procurement and personal discovering and continue to discover what is the big cultural ambience, the big sphere culturally about human conscience. And I hope this is part of the contribution in the use and thinking about conscience. And conscience cannot be taught. Conscience is the elevation, is the travel on human mind from obtaining global knowledge to put into functional use of intelligence. But however, intelligence in this area can have both positive or malignant intelligence. Once again, I will cite Chinese created the gunpowder festivity, firecrackers in the New Year's chasing dragons away. The fireworks we all enjoy here in U.S. Fourth of July, right? But the firecrackers, the gunpowder, when it got to the hands of the West, by way, it's a long question, by way of the Mongols, they become explosives. From explosives, they become cannons. From cannons, today, we have the biggest arsenal of nuclear bombs between the Soviet Union before, US today, China, even Israel, France, the enough gunpowders in the nuclear arsenal can blast this little planet away hundreds of times. So it's a matter of moving the conscience is the filter to moving benefit good intelligence into the realm of called wisdom. Why do we think the Native Americans they also speak the language of conscience? Unfortunately, they have not the written format. However, the respect for the elders in the entire America, North, South, Central America is the wisdom and experience. So I credit conscience is the filter to bring the good knowledge, good intelligence into the area, the cultural sphere of wisdom, because wisdom can be recycled back to the wider body of human knowledge. I just like to encourage the global thinkers, east, west, wherever direction you're from, by my analysis of the total global misinterpretation of the Chinese value system as a whole, get to find our way in bits and pieces also to find eradication, to find correction. And all this block of the Chinese philosophy value system has been done by the phenomena of the Western expansion, and also from 1500, which is Wang Yang Ming, 1492 with the US, the Western expansion, to today, and the sequence of events from the end of Ming Dynasty and from Qing Dynasty, not particularly accepting or promoting Wang Yang Ming's values, and then to the Chinese fragile rise of the Republic, the warlords, and the May 4th movement reacting to the humiliation of the Chinese, starting by the Versailles Treaty, when Chinese were part of the Allies, and yet when the West decided to give the German possession in the province of Shandong and the city of Qingdao to the Japanese instead. And that had started another difficulty, the entry of the Japanese eventually into Manchuria, which had led to the 8 years war, but actually it's 14 years and more in the making. And from that war, the split of the civil war between the KMT, the National Party of Chiang Kai-shek, and then Mao Zedong's Communist Party. And all the way up to 1948, the year I was born, another diaspora of Chinese who fled to Hong Kong, Macau, like my family, Others have gone to Indochina, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, and all this diaspora created with the wars. And just remind all of you one more time, between the 40s, early 50s, until 1973, there is a long silence. There's a long and hostility between the Communist Chinese outside of China, Macau, Hong Kong, and the Taiwanese government and their war and distrust. 1972, I got my bachelor's degree. In the same summer, after trying to work at the youth counseling program in New York, because my paper, I cannot stay, returning to Chicago, where I have worked 4 summers as a waiter to put myself through college. In that time and period, I got the job because my languages as a sales rep for China Airlines. Because I filled in the application form, I have written that the question was, do you still have relatives in mainland China? I put down my half sister, my half brother, who are 25 years older than me, was still in Shanghai. I was never given the status as a sales rep, just because the fear, the connection between the two China. So for those many of you who think about, it's a good reference about using the situation of the Jewish diaspora and rethink of the Chinese diaspora and think about opium, Holocaust. And all of these ideas can put into the sequence and how we define cultural dissonance. I have seen Chinese of my age commit suicide in Brazil. I have seen Chinese women, because of the chaos of the war in China and between at the time of Vietnam, Cambodia, these beautiful women in Macau could not speak any of the Chinese language, but was French raised, French educated. And because that isolation without children, husband away in Indochina, and she had also committed suicide. These are the few stories, unspoken, unwritten, and even for the most of the Chinese culture, a lot of that to be bearing shame. And they muffle it, quiet it, and all that. I think it is time for the world to look at, do we want to continue to accuse a country with 3 dominant value system advocating human conscience with the minimum, almost nothing, with such composure and the grasp of a human conscience without any dependency or the religion or deity? I have nothing but praise and my gratitude with my Roman Catholic upbringing. Today, if you ask me, where do you see God in your language? I see God in every smiling face of a child, of an older woman, of anyone, is the expression of kindness. I cannot share the gods have chosen people to be doing what they are doing today in Palestine, in Gaza. The God that I see is the God of kindness. And by my understanding the human conscience. I will stop here. Thank you. Pronto, Gustavo? Ficou bom? Tá bom. Eu vou cozinhar agora. Tá bom? Tá bom. Eu colocar o thumbnail. Daí no, okay, any desk?